The first thing I saw when I turned onto Hawthorne Drive was my mother. She was standing barefoot in the middle of her own driveway, clutching my father's old photograph against her chest with both hands as if it were the only thing in the world no one had managed to take away from her. She was 67 years old. Her hair was uncombed. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears left. She just stood there in silence, staring at the front door of the house she and my father had spent 26 years paying for. Then I saw everything around her. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the curb. Some had been sealed with packing tape. Others had burst open after being thrown onto the ground. Clothes spilled across the grass. Family photo albums lay half open in the dirt. Kitchen dishes were wrapped in old newspaper, piled beside broken picture frames. One of my father's fishing rods rested across two boxes. His favorite armchair had been dragged onto the sidewalk. A bottle of my mother's prescription medicine had rolled out of a box and come to rest in the gutter. Nobody bothered to pick it up. The entire front lawn looked less like the home I had grown up in, and more like the aftermath of an eviction. Behind my mother, two men wearing property management uniforms walked in and out of the house without saying a word. Every time they came out, they carried another box, another chair, another piece of furniture, another part of my parents' life. Neither of them looked at my mother. Neither of them spoke to her. To them, she wasn't the homeowner. She was simply an obstacle standing in the driveway while they emptied the house. A few feet away, a locksmith knelt in front of the door. The sound of his drill echoed through the quiet neighborhood as he bored through the lock. Metal shavings scattered across the porch with every pull of the trigger. My mother took one small step toward the house. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. In a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, "Please. My medicine is still inside." No one answered her. The drill never stopped. One of the workers walked past her carrying another box without even making eye contact. That's when I noticed the woman standing near the mailbox. Perfect hair, a tailored business suit, a thick stack of legal papers tucked neatly beneath one arm. She watched everything with the calm expression of someone supervising a routine maintenance job instead of throwing a 67-year-old widow out of her own home. She pointed toward another pile of boxes. "Take those too." The workers obeyed without hesitation. I looked around for a sheriff. There wasn't one. I searched for a court officer. There wasn't one. I looked for a judge's eviction order taped to the front door. There wasn't one of those either. Only a woman giving orders. And everyone acting as though she had the authority to decide whether my mother still belonged in the home she had lived in for more than a quarter of a century. My mother had lived at 18 Hawthorne Drive for 26 years, long before Silver Pines became the kind of neighborhood where the HOA measured lawns, approved paint colors, and treated every mailbox like a symbol of obedience. My father had bought the house when I was 12. Back then, it was a modest two-story home at the edge of an unfinished development, surrounded by bare dirt, young trees, and streets that still smelled like fresh asphalt. He worked as a licensed electrician, and my mother worked 4 days a week at the county library. They had never been wealthy, but they saved carefully, avoided unnecessary debt, and paid every bill before it was due. Nearly everything inside that house carried part of their story. My father had built the oak shelves in the living room with his own hands. He had installed the lights over the kitchen island and repaired the cracked steps leading to the backyard. The maple tree beside the breakfast window had been little more than a thin sapling when he planted it. By the time I left for college, its branches reached above the roof. After my father died from a heart condition, my mother refused to leave. I offered to buy her a smaller home closer to me. Later, when my business took me overseas, I offered to move her into a private community with full-time maintenance and medical support. She always gave me the same answer. Hawthorne Drive was not an investment to her. It was the last place where her marriage still felt alive. She kept my father's favorite chair beside the fireplace. His tools remained arranged in the garage exactly as he had left them. Every spring, she planted red flowers along the walkway because they had been his favorite. Selling the house would have meant packing away the final pieces of the life they had built together. My mother was not confrontational. She was the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her at the grocery store. She delivered soup to sick neighbors, collected mail for families on vacation, and volunteered at the library's weekend reading program. For years, she had attended HOA meetings without complaint and paid every assessment on time. That made her the perfect target for Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa had become HOA president 3 years earlier. From the beginning, she transformed routine neighborhood rules into instruments of pressure. She arrived at inspections in dark pink suits and pointed heels, carrying violation notices as though they were court orders. Under her leadership, residents began receiving fines for faded door paint, visible garden hoses, trash cans removed too late, and shrubs that extended a few inches beyond approved lines. At first, my mother's notices seemed harmless. $75 for leaving a recycling bin beside the garage. $100 because a flower pot was supposedly the wrong shade of blue. Another fine because the lawn service had missed a narrow strip of grass near the mailbox. My mother paid them without telling me. She knew I was negotiating major developments overseas, and she did not want me worrying about what she described as small neighborhood problems. Whenever I called, she told me everything was fine. She talked about the weather, the maple tree, and the books she was reading. She never mentioned Vanessa, but the fines kept growing. Vanessa began targeting parts of the house that had existed for decades. She claimed the backyard awning violated new architectural standards. She said the driveway needed to be resurfaced immediately. She declared that the original garage door no longer matched the neighborhood's approved design, even though dozens of nearby homes had the same model. My mother tried to explain that those features had been approved when the house was built. She mailed copies of old photographs, receipts, and construction records to the HOA office. Most of her letters went unanswered. Then the notices stopped arriving by mail. Vanessa moved everything to an online portal my mother had never been taught to use. Late fees accumulated without her knowledge. Administrative charges appeared beside legal expenses that no attorney had ever explained. A few $100s in questionable fines became several thousand, then tens of thousands. By the time my mother finally admitted that something was wrong, she was ashamed. She believed she had misunderstood the rules. She worried that asking me for help would make her seem incapable of living alone. That was exactly what Vanessa had counted on. She did not choose my mother because the violations were serious. She chose her because she was elderly, widowed, polite, and unlikely to fight back. So, before this story goes any further, think about how many people quietly pay unfair penalties because they are too embarrassed or intimidated to ask for help. Share your opinion, because rules meant to protect a community become dangerous when one person uses them to isolate the most vulnerable residents. What my mother did not know was that Vanessa was no longer trying to collect fines. She was building a paper trail designed to take the house. The first unmistakable sign that Vanessa wanted more than money appeared 6 weeks before I came home. My mother woke one morning to find 3 bright orange survey stakes driven into the grass behind her house. A white paint line ran from the side fence toward the clubhouse property, cutting across nearly 12 feet of her backyard. No one had asked permission to enter. No notice had explained what the markings meant. When she called the HOA office, the receptionist told her the stakes were part of a routine community improvement assessment. Vanessa arrived less than an hour later, stepping out of a black SUV in a dark pink suit and high heels that sank slightly into the damp lawn. She carried a folder of violation notices and walked straight into the backyard without waiting to be invited. She pointed toward the painted line and informed my mother that Silver Pines planned to widen the service road leading to the clubhouse. According to Vanessa, the HOA had determined that the strip of land beside the fence was part of a common access corridor. My mother knew that could not be true. My father had maintained that yard for more than 2 decades. The fence, maple tree, and drainage bed had all been shown on the original closing documents. She retrieved an old property sketch from the kitchen and tried to show it to Vanessa. Vanessa barely looked at it. She treated the faded county document like an irrelevant family keepsake and insisted that the HOA's updated site plan overruled anything my mother had received years earlier. Then, she placed another notice on the patio table. It accused my mother of obstructing an approved community easement with her fence, flower beds, and storage shed. The notice demanded that everything within the painted area be removed in 10 days. If my mother refused, the HOA would hire a contractor, charge the cost to her account, and add a daily penalty until the land was cleared. The storage shed alone contained my father's tools. The flower beds had been planted around the maple tree he had chosen with me when I was a teenager. My mother tried to arrange a meeting with the board, but Vanessa controlled the agenda. Her request was postponed twice, then reduced to a written submission that received no meaningful response. 3 days later, A contractor entered the backyard while my mother was at a medical appointment. The security camera above the rear door recorded two men removing four fence panels and stacking them beside the garage. They measured the painted corridor, photographed the shed, and attached a red demolition tag to its door. One of them used a small excavator to scrape away part of the flower bed, exposing roots near the maple tree. When my mother returned, she found broken boards in the grass and deep tire tracks across the yard. Vanessa arrived before the police non-emergency officer had even finished taking notes. She carried a printed access authorization bearing her own signature and claimed the contractor had acted under the HOA's maintenance authority. The officer explained that the dispute appeared to involve property boundaries and advised both sides to obtain legal documentation. Vanessa treated that cautious response as a victory. The following morning, the HOA sent my mother a bill for more than $6,000. It included contractor mobilization fees, administrative review charges, emergency legal consultation, fence removal expenses, and a penalty for interfering with community access. My mother had not interfered with anything. She had not even been home. When she refused to pay, Vanessa escalated the pressure. New violations appeared almost daily. The driveway had minor surface cracks. The backyard awning lacked current approval. The garage light was allegedly too bright. A delivery vehicle had remained at the curb 4 minutes beyond the permitted time. Each notice carried another fee. Each fee generated late charges. Every late charge was added to the growing balance Vanessa intended to use against the house. Then a property developer named Crestmore Residential began visiting Silver Pines. Its representatives toured the clubhouse, photographed the undeveloped lots, and repeatedly stopped beside my mother's backyard. County planning maps later showed why the strip of land mattered. Without those 12 feet, the developer could not create the second access lane required for its proposed clubhouse expansion and luxury recreation center. Vanessa had already promoted the expansion in private meetings as the project that would raise property values and secure her legacy as HOA president. My mother's house stood directly in the way. Crestmore could have negotiated honestly. The HOA could have asked to purchase an easement. Vanessa did neither. Instead, she created violations, inflated the balance, and portrayed my mother as a negligent owner who could no longer maintain her property. At the next board meeting, my mother was finally allowed to appear. She carried photographs, payment records, and the original property sketch. Vanessa seated her at the far end of the room and limited her presentation before most board members had examined a single page. The official minutes later described my mother as confused, disruptive, and unwilling to cooperate with a safety project. None of that was true. 2 residents later confirmed that my mother had remained calm throughout the meeting. One of them remembered Vanessa repeatedly interrupting her and refusing to answer whether a county survey had been completed. Within days, neighbors began hearing that my mother owed the HOA more than $20,000. Some were told the house might soon become vacant. Others were informed that the property had already been identified for redevelopment. My mother stopped attending community events. She kept the curtains closed and avoided walking to the mailbox when Vanessa's SUV was parked near the clubhouse. The pressure was not only financial. It was designed to make her feel isolated inside the home she had owned longer than Vanessa had lived in the neighborhood. The final notice arrived through the online portal, not by certified mail. It claimed the balance had reached $38,000 and warned that enforcement action would begin unless full payment was received within 5 business days. My mother discovered it only after an unfamiliar man appeared on the porch to photograph the front door. She immediately called the HOA office. No one returned her message. The next morning, Vanessa emailed the management company and described the property as abandoned, unsafe, and subject to emergency possession procedures. She attached selected pages from the HOA bylaws, omitted the sections requiring board approval and legal notice, and ordered the company to arrange a locksmith and removal crew. There was still no foreclosure judgment. There was still no eviction order. There was only Vanessa's confidence that no one would challenge her before the developer secured the land. On the morning I returned, my mother opened her front door and found workers waiting on the porch. Vanessa stood behind them with a prepared inventory sheet. My mother was given minutes to collect medication, identification, and a few personal items before strangers began carrying her belongings outside. Vanessa believed the operation had been timed perfectly. I was overseas. My mother had no attorney. The board had been told the matter was legally resolved. Once the locks were changed, Vanessa expected fear and confusion to do the rest. What she did not know was that Crestmore's confidential purchase proposal had already been uploaded into the management company's files. And beside the proposed buyer's name was the signature of Vanessa's own brother-in-law. I did not confront Vanessa again that morning. Anger would have given her something useful. She could have described me as threatening, unstable, or unwilling to respect the HOA's process. Instead, I helped my mother gather her medication, secured the boxes on the lawn, and moved her into a nearby hotel under my company's name. Once she was safe, I asked her to tell me everything from the beginning. We sat at a small table beside the hotel window while she opened a worn canvas bag filled with notices, receipts, handwritten notes, and copies of letters she had mailed to the HOA. She had kept far more than Vanessa expected. Every payment confirmation was folded neatly by date. Every unanswered letter had a copy. My mother had even written down the time and name of every person she called. She believed the papers showed that she had tried to cooperate. I knew they showed something much more valuable. They showed a pattern. The first notices had arrived by regular mail. Later violations appeared only in the online portal. Several letters claimed to have been sent by certified mail, but none included tracking numbers. The penalties increased immediately after my mother questioned the painted line in her backyard. Charges labeled as legal review appeared on dates when no attorney had contacted her. I photographed every document and uploaded the files to a secure folder shared with my legal team. Then I asked for the security footage. My mother had installed cameras after someone stole a package from her porch 2 years earlier. She had almost forgotten that the rear camera stored recordings in the cloud. We opened the account and found weeks of video showing Vanessa, contractors, and management employees entering the property without permission. One clip showed Vanessa standing beside the maple tree while a contractor pointed toward the clubhouse. Another captured her directing 2 men to remove fence panels. A third recorded her telling the crew that the old woman inside would not be a problem much longer. The audio was clear. We saved the original files, downloaded certified copies, and created a written timeline matching each visit to the notices Vanessa later issued. I instructed my attorney not to edit or compress anything. The original metadata could establish the date, time, device, and location of every recording. While my mother reviewed the footage, I called the county clerk's office. The deed still listed Margaret Cole as the sole owner of the property. There had been no transfer, no foreclosure sale, and no recorded court judgment granting possession to the HOA. The clerk also found no new easement across the backyard, and no amendment affecting the original parcel boundaries. That meant Vanessa's supposed common access corridor existed only on the HOA's private site plan. It did not exist in the county records. I hired a licensed surveyor that afternoon and requested an emergency boundary survey. He located the original corner monuments, compared them with the recorded subdivision plat, and measured the painted corridor Vanessa intended to clear. His preliminary conclusion was direct. The fence was inside my mother's property line. The flower beds, shed, and maple tree were also entirely on her land. The planned service lane would have crossed nearly 12 feet of private property without a recorded easement. He placed temporary markers along the true boundary and photographed every disturbed area. Next, my legal team examined the HOA bylaws, declarations, enforcement policy, and meeting minutes. Vanessa had repeatedly cited broad language allowing the HOA to maintain common areas and address immediate safety hazards. But she had omitted the sections limiting entry onto privately owned lots. Non-emergency access required written notice. Structural removal required board approval. A lien above a specified amount required a recorded vote, proper service, and an opportunity for the homeowner to contest the charges. My mother had received none of those protections. The meeting minutes created an even larger problem for Vanessa. The version stored in the management portal stated that the board had unanimously authorized enforcement against my mother, but 2 board members had been absent from that meeting. Another had voted only to request an updated survey, not to remove the fence or pursue possession of the house. When my attorney contacted them separately, both agreed to preserve their emails and personal notes. One board member forwarded the original draft minutes. They contained no authorization for eviction, lien enforcement, or emergency entry. Someone had changed the record afterward. The financial documents were equally suspicious. A forensic accountant reviewed my mother's account and found that several fines had been entered weeks after their stated issue dates. Fees were calculated on balances that had not yet existed. Legal charges appeared without matching invoices. The contractor who removed the fence had billed the HOA through a company registered to a business partner of Vanessa's brother-in-law. The same family connection appeared in Crestmore Residential's purchase proposal. That proposal described my mother's house as a distressed property likely to become available through HOA enforcement. It valued the home almost $200,000 below comparable houses in Silver Pines. An attached redevelopment sketch showed the proposed service lane passing directly through her backyard. Vanessa had not simply abused a rule. She had used the HOA's enforcement system to reduce the value of a privately owned home, force out an elderly widow, and create access for a developer connected to her family. I still needed proof that she had personally directed the lockout. The management company's archived emails provided it. Because my holding company had acquired the management operation, our transition team had lawful access to its corporate records. I ordered an immediate preservation hold on Vanessa's communications, contractor instructions, payment approvals, and portal activity. The emails showed that the management staff had repeatedly asked for a court order before changing the locks. Vanessa responded that the board had already approved possession and that legal counsel supported immediate action. Neither statement was true. Hours before my mother was removed, a manager warned Vanessa that no writ of possession had been provided. Vanessa replied that delay would endanger the redevelopment agreement and instructed the crew to proceed under her authority. She had written the evidence herself. By late afternoon, my attorney had assembled the deed, survey, camera footage, altered meeting records, financial discrepancies, and lockout emails into a single evidence file. Copies were prepared for the county, code enforcement, the sheriff's office, the HOA's insurer, and every member of the board. I could have called Vanessa then and told her exactly what we had found. Instead, I requested an emergency public meeting. Vanessa approved it because she believed it would give her an opportunity to humiliate my mother one final time in front of the neighborhood. She planned to present the growing fines, defend the clubhouse expansion, and portray me as an emotional son interfering in a lawful HOA matter. She did not know the original surveyor would be there. She did not know the management company had preserved her emails, and she had no idea that the law firm named on her notices was preparing to deny ever authorizing the eviction. The legal reversal began with a document Vanessa had assumed no one would ever read carefully. It was the original declaration recorded when Silver Pines was first developed. The document divided the neighborhood into separate construction phases, each governed by slightly different restrictions. My mother's house belonged to the earliest phase, completed years before Vanessa joined the HOA board. That distinction changed everything. The newer architectural standards Vanessa had used to punish my mother did not automatically apply to structures that had already been approved. The backyard awning, original garage door, fence, driveway, and storage shed were protected as pre-existing improvements. The HOA could request maintenance if something became unsafe, but it could not declare those structures illegal simply because newer homes followed different design rules. My mother's property had effectively been grandfathered in. Every fine based on those structures rested on a false interpretation of the governing documents. The HOA's lien procedure created an even more serious problem. The bylaws required a formal board vote before enforcement charges above a specified amount could be secured against a home. The homeowner had to receive proper notice, access to the evidence, and a meaningful opportunity to challenge the debt. The vote had to appear in the official minutes, and the lien had to be recorded through the county using accurate supporting documents. Vanessa had skipped nearly every requirement. There had been no valid vote authorizing the $38,000 balance. 2 directors listed as approving the action had not attended the meeting. A third had never supported enforcement beyond requesting a survey. The minutes had been altered after circulation, and the version submitted to the management company did not match the original notes kept by board members. Without a lawful vote, the lien was defective. Without a valid lien or foreclosure judgment, the HOA had no right to take possession. Without a court-issued writ, the lockout had no legal foundation. The documents Vanessa carried onto my mother's driveway were not an eviction order. They were internal HOA notices arranged to look official enough that contractors would obey them and an elderly homeowner would be too frightened to resist. The law firm named at the bottom of those notices delivered the next blow. Its managing attorney reviewed the correspondence and confirmed that the firm had never approved an eviction, lock change, property seizure, or forced removal. The firm had answered one general question about collecting unpaid assessments months earlier. Vanessa had taken that limited response, removed the context, and repeatedly represented it as authorization for actions the attorneys had never reviewed. The firm issued a written denial and demanded that the HOA stop using its name on any notice connected to my mother's property. That denial exposed Vanessa's favorite defense before she could use it. She could no longer claim that lawyers had ordered the lockout. The survey results were just as conclusive. The licensed surveyor located the recorded boundary markers and compared them with the original subdivision plat. His sealed report showed that the disputed 12-foot strip had always belonged to my mother. No public easement crossed it. No HOA access right had been recorded. No amendment had transferred it into common property. Vanessa's painted corridor was not an easement. It was a proposed private access lane drawn through land the developer did not own. The clubhouse expansion also lacked the permits required to disturb the fence, alter drainage, remove landscaping, or begin grading near a residential boundary. County planning staff had received an early concept sketch, but no final plan had been approved. Vanessa had presented a developer's proposal as though it were an authorized community project. The camera footage established that she knew the project was still uncertain. In one recording, Vanessa stood near the damaged flower bed while the contractor explained that the county might reject the service lane without the homeowner's consent. Vanessa directed him to continue measuring and insisted that the property would soon be under HOA control. The audio placed her intentions beside the physical evidence. She expected enforcement pressure to deliver land that negotiation could not. The financial records connected that pressure to a personal interest. The contractor who removed the fence had received repeated payments approved outside the normal bidding process. Crestmore Residential's proposed purchase entity listed Vanessa's brother-in-law as a managing member. Internal emails referred to my mother's property as the final obstacle blocking the expansion. One attachment was especially damaging. It contained a projected timeline showing the HOA fines increasing, the property entering enforcement, the house becoming available below market value, and the service lane opening immediately after acquisition. The document had been sent to Vanessa weeks before she ordered the locks changed. Her campaign had not been a series of administrative mistakes. It had been a coordinated attempt to manufacture distress. By threatening an elderly widow with escalating debt, Vanessa intended to force a sale, transfer the property to a connected buyer, and obtain access to land worth far more than the discounted purchase price. Then, my ownership of Silver Pines development became relevant. Purchasing the development did not give me the power to rewrite HOA votes or personally remove elected directors. The Homeowners Association remained a separate legal entity controlled by its governing documents and residents. But the acquisition gave my company ownership of the management operation, the undeveloped parcels, the clubhouse development rights, and several contracts Vanessa relied on to carry out her plan. I could preserve the corporate records. I could suspend contractors working under development agreements. I could reject proposed access through land the developer did not own. I could notify the insurer, county, and law enforcement agencies before anyone had time to alter files or destroy evidence. And I could make certain that every resident saw what had been done in their name. My attorneys sent preservation notices to Vanessa, each board member, the management company, Crestmore Residential, the fence contractor, and the HOA's law firm. The notices required them to retain emails, messages, invoices, recordings, meeting drafts, portal logs, and financial transactions related to my mother's home. The management company froze Vanessa's administrative access before she could delete anything. The contractor was instructed to stop all work on the proposed service lane. The insurer opened a claim involving wrongful entry, property damage, defective enforcement, and potential misconduct by an HOA officer. County planning placed a hold on the clubhouse expansion pending review of the boundary and permit violations. Then the sheriff's office confirmed that no deputy had served an eviction order at 18 Hawthorne Drive and no court had authorized the removal of my mother's belongings. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, every institution Vanessa had invoked to frighten my mother was distancing itself from her decisions. The county had not approved the land use. The law firm had not approved the eviction. The board had not approved the lien. The court had not approved possession. The developer did not own the disputed land. Vanessa had authority only where rules and records supported her. Once those records were examined, the power she displayed on my mother's driveway began disappearing one document at a time. She finally learned who I was when the management company sent notice of the preservation hold. The email identified Ethan Cole Holdings as the new owner and instructed her not to access, move, amend, or destroy any Silver Pines management records. It also informed her that the proposed clubhouse transaction had been suspended. For the first time all day, Vanessa called me directly. I did not answer. The evidence no longer belonged in a private argument between us. It had already been copied to attorneys, board members, county officials, the insurer, and the sheriff's office. Nothing she said over the phone could erase the altered minutes, the unauthorized entry, or the redevelopment timeline carrying her family connection. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 that evening. Vanessa still believed she could control the room. She planned to accuse my mother of avoiding legitimate assessments and portray me as a wealthy outsider attempting to intimidate an elected board. What she did not understand was that I had no intention of asking the residents to trust my version of events. The surveyor would show them the boundary. The attorneys would show them the false authorization. The board members would show them the altered minutes. The camera would show them who entered the property. And Vanessa's own emails would show them why. By 6 that evening, the Silver Pines clubhouse parking lot was full. Residents who had ignored HOA meetings for years were standing along the walls and gathering near the entrance. News of my mother's removal had spread through the neighborhood, but most people had heard only Vanessa's version. They had been told that Margaret Cole owed thousands of dollars, refused to correct serious violations, and forced the board to take emergency action. Vanessa arrived in the same dark pink suit she had worn on my mother's driveway. Her heels struck the clubhouse floor with the confidence of someone entering a room she had controlled for years. She placed a thick binder at the head of the table, arranged her notices in front of her, and looked toward my mother as if the meeting were merely the final step in removing her from Silver Pines. My mother sat beside me in the first row. She looked exhausted, but she was no longer holding a plastic bag of medication on the sidewalk. Her belongings had been secured, her attorney was present, and every document Vanessa had tried to hide was now backed up in several locations. The county inspector stood near the presentation screen. The licensed surveyor waited beside a large mounted property map. 2 members of the HOA board sat apart from Vanessa, each carrying copies of the original meeting notes. A representative from the management company had brought the archived email records. A sheriff's deputy remained near the rear door to document any statements involving the lockout and removal of personal property. Vanessa began by presenting the $38,000 balance as established fact. She described the backyard as a safety obstruction and treated the proposed clubhouse lane as an approved community improvement. She implied that my mother had abandoned the property by failing to comply with repeated notices. Then, the county inspector opened the permit database. No permit had been issued for fence removal, grading, drainage changes, demolition of the shed, or construction of a service lane. The clubhouse expansion had never moved beyond preliminary discussion. No county department had authorized entry onto my mother's land. The surveyor displayed the recorded subdivision plat beside his sealed boundary report. The true property line ran beyond the fence Vanessa had ordered removed. The disputed 12-foot strip, the flower beds, the shed, and the maple tree all stood entirely within my mother's parcel. There was no recorded easement granting the HOA or Crestmore residential access through the yard. A low murmur moved through the room. Vanessa attempted to rely on the HOA's private site plan, but the surveyor identified it as an unrecorded concept drawing prepared for the developer. It had no power to alter a deed, move a boundary, or create an easement. The management representative presented the lockout emails next. The first message showed staff requesting a court order. The second showed Vanessa claiming the board and legal counsel had approved immediate possession. The final message showed her ordering the crew to proceed after being warned that no writ had been provided. The HOA's attorney then confirmed that no eviction had been authorized. The firm had never reviewed a plan to replace the locks, remove my mother's belongings, or seize control of the house. Vanessa had taken the firm's name from unrelated assessment correspondence and placed it on notices that created the appearance of legal approval. The sheriff's deputy recorded that confirmation. My mother's attorney explained that an HOA notice was not a court order. A president's signature could not replace a judgment. A management crew could not lawfully remove a homeowner merely because the board claimed money was owed. Vanessa's posture changed when the original meeting minutes appeared on the screen. Her version stated that the board had unanimously approved enforcement. The earlier draft showed no such vote. Two directors listed as present had been absent, and another confirmed that he had supported only a professional survey. Portal records showed that the minutes had been edited from Vanessa's administrator account after they were circulated. The forensic accounting summary followed. Several fines had been entered after their stated issue dates. Late fees had been calculated retroactively. Legal charges had no matching invoices. Contractor payments had bypassed the HOA's normal bidding rules. The company paid to remove the fence shared a business connection with Vanessa's brother-in-law. Then, Crestmore's confidential redevelopment timeline appeared. The document showed my mother's fines increasing until the house became distressed, followed by a below-market acquisition and immediate access through the backyard. The proposed purchasing company was also connected to Vanessa's brother-in-law. The residents were no longer looking at my mother. They were looking at Vanessa. She tried to shift responsibility toward the management company, but her own emails carried direct instructions, deadlines, and payment approvals. She had not followed bad advice. She had repeatedly pressured others to act after they warned her that the required legal documents did not exist. That was when I disclosed my role in the development acquisition. I made it clear that purchasing Silver Pines Development did not make me president of the HOA and did not allow me to overturn resident elections. The association belonged to the homeowners. But my company now owned the management operation, the remaining development rights, and the contracts Vanessa had used to support the clubhouse plan. Those contracts had been suspended, the records had been preserved. The insurer, county, and relevant investigators had received copies. The clubhouse expansion was officially frozen. The contractor responsible for entering my mother's property was removed from all Silver Pines work. The management company withdrew every action connected to the lockout and restored my mother's access to her home. Vanessa reached for her binder, but one of the board members requested that every HOA record in her possession remain in the room. The sheriff's deputy stepped closer while the management representative disabled her remaining administrative credentials. Residents began requesting an immediate recall vote. Some had brought their own notices. An elderly veteran displayed years of unexplained legal charges. A widowed homeowner produced penalties that had appeared after she refused to sell part of her side yard. Another family presented evidence that their account had been marked delinquent despite automatic payments. My mother had not been the first person Vanessa pressured. She had simply been the person whose son returned with access to the records Vanessa believed no resident would ever see. Before the meeting ended, the board placed Vanessa on temporary suspension pending a special election and independent financial review. The HOA's insurer appointed outside counsel. The county opened a formal code enforcement file involving the unauthorized work, and the deputy collected statements concerning the removal of my mother and her possessions. Vanessa had entered the clubhouse expecting to defend her authority. She left without access to the HOA accounts, without control of the management company, and without the support of the residents who had once been afraid to challenge her. But the most damaging discovery came the following morning. Investigators found that my mother's property was only one address on a private list of homes Vanessa had marked for forced acquisition. The investigation continued for 3 months. By the end of the first week, every charge against my mother had been suspended. By the end of the month, the HOA formally canceled the entire $38,000 balance and admitted that the enforcement process had not complied with its own governing documents. The locks on my mother's house were replaced at the HOA's expense. Her furniture, photographs, clothing, and personal belongings were returned. The damaged fence was rebuilt on the surveyed property line. The flower beds were restored, and an arborist was hired to protect the exposed roots of the maple tree my father had planted. The clubhouse expansion never happened. County officials rejected the proposed service lane because Crestmore had no easement, no approved permit, and no right to use my mother's backyard. The concept plans were withdrawn, and permanent survey monuments were installed so no future board could pretend the boundary was uncertain. The contractor that entered the property lost every Silver Pines contract. Its insurer paid for the physical damage. and the company faced a licensing review after investigators learned that its workers had removed fencing without verifying ownership or permit authority. Crestmore abandoned the purchase proposal once its connection to Vanessa's brother-in-law became public. The developer also reimbursed the HOA for several planning expenses that had been approved without proper disclosure. Vanessa's consequences were more severe. The residents removed her from the board during a special election. She lost access to the HOA office, financial accounts, resident records, and management portal. An independent audit identified undisclosed contractor relationships, altered meeting records, unsupported legal charges, and payments that had bypassed required approval procedures. The evidence was turned over to the appropriate investigators. Some matters ended in civil settlements, others remained under review. Vanessa could no longer hide behind the title of HOA president or claim that every decision had been made for the good of the community. The emails, invoices, camera footage, and altered records showed exactly how she had used that position. My mother received a settlement of $185,000 for the wrongful lockout, property damage, legal expenses, and emotional distress. The agreement also recognized in writing that her awning, driveway, garage door, shed, fence, and landscaping were lawful pre-existing features protected from retroactive enforcement. 3 other homeowners challenged penalties issued during Vanessa's presidency. 2 liens were withdrawn. Several residents recovered fees that should never have been charged. For the first time in years, HOA meetings became open, recorded, and difficult to manipulate. New rules required competitive contractor bids, conflict of interest disclosures, independent review of major liens, and direct mailed notice to elderly residents who could not use the online portal. I did not move my mother into a luxury home or convince her to leave Silver Pines. I repaired the porch, installed a better camera system, and helped her replant the red flowers beside the walkway. My father's tools remained in the garage. His chair remained beside the fireplace. The maple tree remained visible from the kitchen window. A few weeks later, my mother walked to the mailbox without checking whether Vanessa's SUV was parked near the clubhouse. That small moment mattered more to me than the settlement. Vanessa believed authority came from a title, a stack of notices, and the fear she could create in people who did not understand the process. She believed my mother's age and kindness made her weak. She was wrong. My mother kept the letters, the cameras kept the footage, the county kept the deed, the survey kept the boundary. And when every piece was placed together, Vanessa's power disappeared before the truth did. I did not win because I came home wealthy. I won because she had built her entire plan on the assumption that no one would examine the records. Consider what you would have done if an HOA had removed your parent from a fully owned home without a court order. Share your opinion in the comments. Send this story to someone who needs to understand the value of keeping records. Save the video, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary homeowners who protect their families through patience, evidence, and the law. The loudest person in a neighborhood does not always hold the real power. Sometimes, the real power is a deed in a county file, a camera recording no one expected, and one homeowner who finally decides to look closely.